Good morning, America. Breaking overnight, the U.S. strikes Iran. President Trump ordering the attack. Our B-2 bombers dropping massive 30,000-pound bunker-busting bombs on 3 Iranian nuclear facilities. Submarine-launched cruise missiles also fired. President Trump addressing the nation overnight.
The strikes were a spectacular military success. Iran's key nuclear enrichment facilities have been completely and totally obliterated.
The president watching the mission unfold in the Situation Room, now warning of greater force to be used if Iran retaliates against the U.S.
Israel's prime minister applauding the move, congratulating the U.S. on what he called a bold decision.
It has done what no other country on earth could do.
Iran striking back against Israel overnight, missiles landing in at least 4 places. Israeli defense forces saying at least 19 people were hurt.
Iran calling the U.S. strikes outrageous, warning it will have everlasting consequences. Now the world watches and waits for the next move on all sides. Are we closer to war or peace? This is a special edition of GMA Sunday. The U.S. strikes Iran.
And we do say good morning, America, to our viewers in the West. We're going to start here with that breaking news overnight. The United States launching airstrikes on Iran. We are now learning it was called Operation Midnight Hammer. The president watching the mission unfold from the Situation Room following the meeting with his national security team. It comes a little more than a week after Israel's surprise attack on Iran aimed at crippling Iran's nuclear program.
And the U.S. B-2 stealth bombers hitting 3 sites in Iran considered crucial to the country's nuclear program, including its uranium enrichment facilities, and using 14 massive 30,000-pound bombs for the very first time, designed to penetrate deep underground and destroy the country's heavily protected operations. President Trump calling it a spectacular success.
The U.S. strike follows nearly 50 years of antagonism between the two governments after Iran's Islamic Revolution in 1979. And it follows decades of warnings from Israel that Iran was on the verge of making nuclear weapons. A news conference was held just moments ago from the Pentagon. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth revealing the complicated details of this mission that included deception, decoys, and incredible secrecy, saying that Iran's nuclear program has been obliterated. He called the strike bold and brilliant and emphasized how proud he is. We have team coverage of the extraordinary events unfolding this morning, beginning with ABC's Ian Pannell in Tel Aviv. Good morning, Ian.
Yeah, good morning, Janae. This is one of the impact sites for the Iranian barrage on Israel. We're in northern Tel Aviv, just a few hours after America struck 3 nuclear sites inside Iran. This, as you can see, was a residential complex. No military targets here.
This morning, in the wake of U.S. strikes on Iranian nuclear facilities, Iran launching a barrage of missiles at Israel. A military official telling ABC 20 to 30 were fired. At least 19 people injured in the attacks, missiles landing in 4 areas in the country. In the port city of Haifa, rescuers searching for survivors in this damaged building. And we were in Tel Aviv as the alert sounded.
The air raid siren has just started to sound. We're getting reports that Iran has fired ballistic missiles.
At least one of those missiles making a direct hit in the city. First responders scrambling to the scene. Residential buildings reduced to rubble. We went there too.
This was Iran's response to American bombing of 3 nuclear sites inside the country. Within a few hours, the sirens rang, the bombs landed, and you can see the chaos here on the ground as Israel starts to count the numbers injured and the numbers killed.
Iran claiming it targeted the main airport and a biological research center. President Trump announcing the U.S. military struck 3 nuclear sites, Fordo, Natanz and Isfahan, calling the attack very successful. ABC News geolocating this video showing flashes of light and distant explosions in the direction of the Isfahan nuclear facility. The operation carried out by multiple B-2 bombers, according to U.S. officials. The B-2s are capable of flying more than 40 hours and refueling mid-air. They're also the only aircraft that can drop the 30,000-pound massive ordnance penetrator bombs, known as bunker busters, considered the best chance of penetrating Iran's deep underground nuclear facilities. These satellite images taken before the attack at Fordo, capturing the site from above. A U.S. official confirming a number of bunker busters were dropped. And a number of Tomahawk cruise missiles were also fired at targets inside Iran from a U.S. Navy submarine. Now, Iranian authorities and the International Atomic Energy Agency reporting there are no signs of radiation leakage around the three sites, adding residents nearby are safe. In the immediate aftermath of the US bombing, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu thanking President Trump.
History will record that President Trump acted to deny the world's most dangerous regime the world's most dangerous weapons. His leadership today has created a pivot of history that can help lead the Middle East and beyond to a future of prosperity and peace.
Israel had been lobbying for US assistance as it launched more attacks on Iran overnight and this morning.
Iran reserves all options to defend its security interests and people.
Iran's foreign minister responding to the US attacks, calling them outrageous and warning Iran will respond as necessary.
Well, the Iranians vowing revenge, laying the blame on America throughout Israel's bombing campaign for supporting Israel. Meanwhile, the Israeli Defense Forces have been speaking, saying they need to do a battlefield assessment. In other words, work out exactly how successful the US bombing was. They were asked whether or not Iran had moved this potentially dangerous, highly enriched uranium from the Fordo site that the US bombed. The answer was, it's too early to say. They still need to look at it. Gio.
Ian, thank you for your reporting there from Tel Aviv. And President Trump warned Iran that the U.S. could consider additional targets if the country does not agree to peace. ABC senior political correspondent Rachel Scott has more from the White House. Good morning, Rachel.
Gio, good morning to you. And the president said he was going to give it 2 weeks. He made this decision within 2 days. It's impossible to overstate the significance and the weight of this moment. The United States has now been plunged squarely and directly in the middle of this conflict. And it is a striking decision for a president who campaigned on getting the U.S. out of foreign conflict. In what could be the most consequential moment of his administration, President Trump overnight addressing the nation, claiming success after striking multiple Iranian nuclear sites.
Iran's key nuclear enrichment facilities have been completely and totally obliterated.
Flanked by Vice President J.D. Vance, Secretary of State Marco Rubio, and Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth, President Trump also sending a stark warning to Iran that if a peace deal is not reached soon, the U.S. could go even further.
There will be either peace or there will be tragedy for Iran far greater than we have witnessed over the last 8 days. Remember, there are many targets left. Tonight's was the most difficult of them all, by far, and perhaps the most lethal. But if peace does not come quickly, we will go after those other targets with precision, speed, and skill.
The White House releasing these photos of the president in the Situation Room along with Vance and other senior officials.
I want to congratulate the great American patriots who flew those magnificent machines tonight.
U.S. officials confirming the military used B-2 bombers, dropping a number of 30,000-pound bunker buster bombs used for the first time in history. Tomahawk cruise missiles were also fired at other targets inside Iran from a U.S. Navy submarine. It comes as the U.S. has been surging their forces in the region for days. Sources say for weeks, the president had been pressed to join Israel's fight against Iran by Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, because only the U.S. had the weapons capable of hitting Iran's underground facilities. A senior administration official telling ABC News the U.S. gave Israel a heads up before launching the strikes. The president also speaking to the prime minister afterwards.
I want to thank and congratulate Prime Minister Bibi Netanyahu. We worked as a team like perhaps no team has ever worked before. And we've gone a long way to erasing this horrible threat to Israel.
The decision to strike dividing lawmakers. Sources say Speaker Mike Johnson and Senate Majority Leader John Thune were briefed prior to the strike. After the president announced, Johnson writing online, President Trump has been consistent and clear that a nuclear-armed Iran will not be tolerated. This is America First policy in action. Democrats pushing back, with House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries saying President Trump failed to deliver on his promise to bring peace to the Middle East. Releasing a statement saying Donald Trump shoulders complete and total responsibility for any adverse consequences that flow from his unilateral military action. On the campaign trail, President Trump painting himself as the candidate of peace, and in his second inaugural address, promising to be a peacemaker and unifier.
We will measure our success not only by the battles we win, but also by the wars that we end, and perhaps most importantly, the wars we never get into.
Sources tell ABC News that there was no formal Gang of Eight briefing for the top leaders in both the House and the Senate. I am told that the Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, the Senate Majority Leader John Thune were briefed before this military action was carried out. On the other end of this, the Democratic leaders, Chuck Schumer, Hakeem Jeffries, sources tell me that they were notified with very little details. One source telling me this morning they believe that notification happened after that military strike was well underway, Janae.
All right, Rachel, we know the incredible secrecy surrounding this mission. And earlier this morning, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth giving details about the operation, the largest strike using B-2 bombers in history. So let's turn to senior national policy reporter Ann Flaherty, who is live at the Pentagon. And Ann, the Defense Secretary calling this a complex and high-risk mission.
Yeah, that's right. He also called it a mission involving misdirection, and that certainly was the case. We woke up yesterday morning hearing that there was a fleet of B-2 bombers headed west. What we didn't know was that there was a second fleet of B-2 bombers headed east. Those could not be tracked. And Defense Secretary Hegseth telling us just now that all of this was intentional. Very few people knew about this mission. They intentionally kept it among few people to try to surprise Iran, because, of course, this is a risky mission. You have U.S. pilots flying over Iran, trying to destroy a site that the U.S. only has the information that it believes that it has. There are unknowns about this nuclear site. But Defense Secretary Hegseth saying everything was successful, that they destroyed the nuclear site. There were 14 bunker buster bombs dropped on this site. They have never been used before. These bombs have been used in testing only. It was the largest B-2 strike in history, he told us. And then the chairman of the Joint Chiefs also said this was the longest flight involving B-2 bombers since 9/11 attacks. So really a historic operation just now that took place. The Pentagon clearly very happy with how they were able to pull this off. But the big question now is whether or not Iran will try to retaliate. We have some 40,000 troops in the region. All eyes in this building are on keeping them safe.
Just incredible details with what the Secretary called deception and decoys used by the United States. And Flaherty, thank you so much. And congressional leaders are divided over President Trump's actions. We're going to turn now to Jay O'Brien. He's our congressional correspondent in Washington with the latest on that part of the story. Jay, good morning.
Yeah, Gio, we're already seeing this emerging fight on Capitol Hill as it relates to this military action. We've seen Democrats come out, top Democrats, and say that in their view, President Trump failed to seek the authorization of Congress in order to go forward with these strikes on Iran. Chuck Schumer, top Democrat in the Senate, normally hawkish when it comes to issues like Iran, issuing a statement overnight, and he said, and I'll read from it, quote, "No president should be allowed to unilaterally march this nation into war," he says, with, quote, "erratic threats and no strategy." That's from Chuck Schumer. Hakeem Jeffries, top Democrat in the House, saying something similar, accusing President Trump of misleading the nation and again saying that he failed to seek the authorization of Congress before going ahead with this military action. Republicans pushing back on that. Speaker Johnson saying that President Trump conducted this operation in the same manner that past presidents have, including President Biden and President Trump himself in his first term. But one more thing here, Gio. Remember this emerging divide that we've been covering over the last few days and weeks. Republicans in President Trump's own camp on the further right saying that they didn't want him to take any kind of action against Iran. Republicans like Marjorie Taylor Greene, Tucker Carlson, Steve Bannon, those voices notably quiet this morning. Some in that camp saying that they are calling for peace, but not directly criticizing President Trump, even though they've spent the last few days publicly warning the president against doing exactly what he did last night, Gio.
And I'm sure we will hear from many more lawmakers in the hours and days to come. Jay O'Brien, thank you so much. Whit.
All right, Gio, let's bring in our chief investigative correspondent, Aaron Katursky. And I know a lot of Americans right now wondering what this means for us, potential threats to the homeland. And you've been talking to law enforcement agencies. We know the NYPD and other agencies across the country ramping up their resources. What are some of the biggest concerns right now?
They're already deployed this morning. The NYPD and a number of other police agencies are deploying to cultural, religious, and diplomatic locations associated with both Iran and Israel. The NYPD said this is out of an abundance of caution, not because of any specific threat, though you heard Iran's top diplomat say during Ian's piece that his country reserves all options to retaliate. Iran may be weakened, but it could still order or encourage attacks on U.S. government institutions, infrastructure, and individuals. Proxy groups have struck U.S. military targets before, and Iranian cyber attacks have compromised water and wastewater systems in the U.S. in the past. Iran has also targeted dissidents living in the U.S. and plotted to assassinate President Trump himself over the killing of top Iranian General Qasem Soleimani during Trump's first term. So law enforcement is taking no chances here. Iran will now see the U.S. as a belligerent actor in these hostilities and so the U.S. homeland is considered by Iran now a legitimate target.
And we know that we've already had some lone wolf attacks that have happened recently. We've been operating at this heightened alert level. So how could the posturing change for law enforcement agencies following these attacks on Iran?
Part of the reason police agencies pay attention to these sensitive locations, particularly ones associated with Israel and Iran, is to deter those kind of lone wolf attacks from people who may take not orders or direction from the Iranians, but may be inspired by the events overseas and want to carry out something on their own. Law enforcement officials are very concerned about that.
And I know this may not be something you have the answer to yet, but like for people living in New York, for example, what could it actually look like? I mean, are we going to see more patrol cars, more officers on the streets?
And we've seen that ever since October 7th, haven't we? So that kind of posture isn't necessarily going to be new. One of the things that agencies are looking at, though, behind the scenes are the cyber capabilities of the Iranians. They've shown to be very sophisticated, even in a weakened state politically now or militarily. They could still launch cyber attacks. Those have targeted U.S. infrastructure in the past, so look for electric grids, wastewater treatment plants, those kinds of sites to be on guard.
Coming up here, the latest on the U.S. strikes against Iran. Plus, a hot air balloon in Brazil catches fire and falls from the sky. Look at that right there, the latest in this deadly crash.
And a GMA scam alert, the warning about people claiming to be cops, calling people about missing jury duty, what you need to watch out for.
And our Rhiannon Alley sat down with some of the players of tonight's NBA Final Game 7 between the Pacers and the Thunder. We are live in Oklahoma City after the break. Welcome back to GMA on this Sunday morning. We are following the latest on the U.S. striking Iran overnight. We'll have more on that in just a moment. But first, a look at some of the other top stories we're following this morning. A fiery hot air balloon crash kills 8 people and injures 13 in southern Brazil. Horrifying moments caught on camera as smoke billowed from the balloon. Seconds later, it came crashing down. The pilot survived the crash. He says a fire started inside the basket, and when the balloon got close to the ground, he told passengers to jump out.
A summertime excursion on the water took a frightening turn when a yacht slammed into a dock in New York City. 400 people were on board that party boat when it hit the pier along the Hudson River. 35 people suffered minor injuries. Investigators are now working to learn what caused that crash.
Toyota is rolling out a price hike for U.S. cars. Reuters reports the automaker will raise prices for some vehicles by an average of $270. Anyone on the market for a car will notice the price jump starting next month. Now, the move follows President Trump's decision to impose a 25% tariff on imported vehicles. However, Toyota says the price hike is due to market trends and competition.
Well, now to the big story that we are following this morning. Many Americans waking up and learning the news. The U.S. striking Iran overnight, launching B-2 bombers with massive 30,000-pound bunker-busting bombs dropped on 3 of the country's nuclear facilities.
And President Trump calling it a spectacular military success and warning there could be more targeted attacks if peace does not come quickly.
Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth and Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Dan Kane, holding a joint news conference saying that the operation was called Midnight Hammer and laid out how it employed decoys to maintain tactical surprise during this mission and said it took months of positioning and preparation so that things could be ready when the president called. ABC senior political correspondent Rachel Scott joins us again now from the White House. Rachel, good morning.
Gio, good morning to you. And now we are learning new details about what was called
Operation Midnight Hammer. This was a highly classified mission, an 18-hour flight carried out under the cover of darkness. It was a mission that only a handful of U.S. officials even knew about, that was full of deception and decoys and fighters. One that Secretary Hegseth said that the U.S. spent months and weeks preparing for so that they would be ready to go when the president gave the green light. The chairman of the Joint Chiefs saying that in a matter of weeks, they went from strategic planning to global execution. The bombers were deployed over the Pacific as a decoy. That was part of a deception effort. And then Hegseth said those B-2s that went the opposite direction were in and out and back without the world knowing. Now, Hegseth was asked during this briefing about concerns that the United States would be dragged to an open-ended, prolonged conflict. Take a listen to what he said.
Anything can happen in conflict, we acknowledge that, but the scope of this was intentionally limited. That's the message that we're sending. With the capabilities of the American military, nearly unlimited.
Forces are now remaining on high alert in case of any potential that Iran does respond. But the chairman of the Joint Chiefs said that would be a very poor decision. And Secretary Hegseth also sending this warning to Iran, saying the absolute idea here that these fighters went undetected for so long over Iranian airspace is something that the Iranians should be taking into their calculation if they're deciding whether or not to respond with.
Rachel Scott, thank you. Let's turn to the security situation here at home and concern about possible retaliation by Iran. Joining us now is ABC's Chief Justice Correspondent Pierre Thomas. Pierre, good morning.
Good morning to you. You're already seeing here in the nation's capital and also New York City stepped up security at Jewish houses of worship and other installations because law enforcement is preparing for the notion that Iran might issue some kind of response. One of the first concerns they have is cybersecurity, the potential that Iran could try to hack into the U.S. infrastructure, the electrical grid, financial sector, etc. Also, they are looking at the possibility, and they've been long concerned about the notion that Iran might have operatives inside the United States.
Now, with a GMA scam alert, fraudsters on the phone telling you you've missed jury duty and you've got to pay a fine. Some people are falling for it, and ABC's Alex Brachet is following this story. Good morning, Alex.
Good morning, Gio. Yeah, I got one of these calls recently. Scammers pretending to be law enforcement and threatening you with arrest if you don't pay a phony jury duty citation.
This morning, authorities sounding the alarm on a new phone scam that could cost you thousands involving jury duty.
They got me scared to the point of losing the ability to really think clearly about what was happening.
Kelsey Hogan spoke to our Detroit affiliate WXYZ. She says a man claiming to be a deputy said that she missed jury duty and needed to come into the station immediately.
And this is where it got scary. He's like, I'm calling because I want to keep this matter in the civil courts. If we move over to the criminal courts, what's going to happen is officers will come to your house today and they will detain you for no less than 72 hours.
She says he wanted her to fork over $9,000, and that was a red flag. Kelsey hung up, but veterinarian Jade Scott wasn't so lucky. A similar scam cost her $2,000.
They called my place of work and really rocked me. That threw me for a loop.
We've tracked warnings about jury duty scams on court sites in all 50 states.
Have a legal matter here that requires your immediate attention,
including Ohio.
You're going to call back as soon as you get this message.
Just last month, someone claiming to be a sergeant with the Franklin County Sheriff's Department told me that I had missed jury duty.
He said that I needed to pay a citation or a warrant would be issued for my arrest. And that's when I hung up and called the Sheriff's Department and also the district court. And both of them told me that that was a scam.
Not just are these people being hurt, but it's undercutting people's willingness or interest in, interacting with the court, serving as jurors. Very important civic duty.
Ohio's Southern District has seen a recent spike in these calls across Columbus, Dayton, and Cincinnati.
The first contact from the court is always going to be mailed. But again, the key point is they're never going to call and ask you for money or tell you, hey, we need you to pay this to make this arrest warrant go away or something like that.
Yeah, and that's going to be the big red flag there, the demand for money. But in a lot of these cases, including mine, these scammers had really specific details, and that, coupled with the seriousness of the court, it sends a lot of people into panic, Janae.
It certainly does. That's why you've got to be on alert. Alex, thank you for that. And still coming up, our Rhiannon Alley sat down with some of the players of tonight's NBA Final Game 7 between the Pacers and the Thunder. We're live in Oklahoma City. There she is, right after the break.
We are back now on GMA with the NBA Finals, and the whole season now comes down to just one game tonight. That Game 7, ABC's Rhiannon Alley is in Oklahoma City. With a look ahead, Rhiannon, good morning.
Good morning, Wade. Good morning from Oklahoma City. History will be made tonight in this very room. Which team will hoist the Larry O'Brien Trophy here for the first time in their franchise's history? Every twist and turn of this series has brought us to this moment, what many call the greatest in sports, Game 7. The ultimate summer blockbuster is set. Game 7 of the NBA Finals, starring players who've turned superheroes just to make it here. If you were any Marvel superhero, who would you be?
Black Panther. I've always been a Spider-Man guy.
Probably Iron Man. I think that's just, Tony Stark's, cool, has all the gadgets.
Spider-Man.
The Indiana Pacers and the Oklahoma City Thunder. A win would mark the first NBA title for either team. What would a championship mean for Pacers fans? First ever in franchise history.
Exactly. You said it right there. It's basketball heaven out there in Indiana. There's going to be a goal in somebody's driveway, everywhere you go out there. They live, breathe, and sleep basketball out there. So a championship will mean everything because the city has never seen it before. I think they'll tear that city down,
A series that started with a thrilling comeback.
And hits long three-pointer from Halliburton. Nails his three-pointer.
Until OKC took the series lead in Game 5, fueled by the outstanding play from Isaiah Hartenstein. Talk about the bond this team has.
It's special. I think we have a certain bond where we put our egos aside. We want to support each other. We want to be behind each other.
But Indiana wasn't done yet. An underdog through the playoffs, winning a critical Game 6 to tie the series. Miles Turner says the earlier losses in Games 2, 4, and 5 only fanned their competitive flame.
We've been underdog in every single series. Here we are in the finals, just one game away.
Did that fuel you along the way?
Absolutely. I think that it puts a chip on your shoulder a bit.
This moment is not just for fans or even themselves. It's also for those who've made sacrifices along the way. OKC's Lou Dort's parents came to Canada from Haiti, sending him to the U.S. in high school to follow his dreams on the court. Who do you look for in the stands after a game?
I'm looking at my mom, my girl, and my son.
And TJ McConnell isn't the only baller in his family. Sister Megan plays in the WNBA. The siblings supporting each other on the court. Andy's hoping to bring home a championship to share with his young kids and his longtime love, Valerie.
My wife has been there from the very beginning. I've known her since kindergarten. Just growing up with her, and I think she has seen, all the highs and lows throughout my career, so it would be.
Now the stats are on OKC's side. The home team is 15-4 in championship deciders, but Indiana has shown throughout the series and really throughout the playoffs that they are not going down without a fight. It's going to be a great game, guys.
It's going to be a good one, Rhiannon. We like to see you on the court with that basketball there. And joining us now with insight on this highly anticipated showdown is ESPN basketball analyst Chiney Ogwumike. We love having you on, Chiney. The Thunder, they could have wrapped this up, put it away on Thursday. What kind of performance do they need to deliver, bring home the win at home?
Good morning, friends. First of all, I'm in heaven because we got a Game 7. And for the Thunder to defend home court, it starts with exactly that, their defense. They've had the best defense in the NBA all year long. And that is the only thing that can slow down the Pacers, whose offense has been off the charts. Also, the Thunder have the MVP. And this is honestly a legacy game opportunity for Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. We call him Shea Butter because his game is so smooth on the court, averaging 30 points in the NBA Finals. So OKC truly has the tools, especially with their defense and their star player, to get that bling, but it'll take 48 minutes of work to complete the mission and win a banner.
Okay, Chiney, you were talking about the Pacers. They've pulled a lot of come-from-behind wins in the playoffs. They even won when Halliburton injured his calf. So what does this all tell you about this team going into Game 7?
I don't know if you guys have heard his song. What the Hallie? What the Halliburton? I don't know if you guys have heard the song, but that is exactly what he had me saying all Game 6 long, because he was diving on the floor for loose balls. He was getting steals. He was playing the hardest on the floor, all while having that calf injury. And the Pacers, honestly, they are one of the most dangerous teams in the postseason that I've ever witnessed. And they've done it really through the power of old school chemistry. Chemistry, I like my teammate. I like passing it to him. I've got fundamental hoops, beautiful assists, fast tempo. They call Indiana the home for hoops, and the Pacers represent that to the T. And I guess that T stands for Tyrese Halliburton. What the hell?
Yeah, that will to win for sure. All right, we're going to put you on the spot here. Who do you like to win this game and win it all?
I always say the basketball gods of Spalding and Wilson. They came to me this morning because I'm looking out my window and it's raining. So I feel like the Thunder is coming. Give me the Thunder Game 7.
Oh, man. You've got the Thunder taking it at home. We will see Game 7. The best 2 words in sports, right? Thank you, Janae. And you can catch the winner-take-all game between the Pacers and the Thunder tonight at 8 Eastern right here on ABC. And we will be right back here on GMA.
And thank you so much for starting your day with us.
We will have more coverage of our coverage of the U.S. strikes on Iran later today on This Week, as well as on World News Tonight.
Plus, you can catch more weekend news coverage over on ABC News Live. That's our streaming channel. You can find it on Hulu, Disney+. Have a great day, and we will see you tomorrow.